The moment her fingers slipped from mine, the world seemed to shatter into a quiet, unbearable stillness. I remember standing in the middle of that empty hospital corridor, sunlight spilling through the tall windows like some cruel reminder that life outside kept moving while mine had stopped. Nurses walked past me with soft, practiced sympathy, but all I could see was the closed door at the end of the hall, the one behind which Mara's life dangled by a fragile thread held together by machines and hope. It felt unreal that less than a year earlier, she had stood laughing in the bright warmth of a summer afternoon while I held a ring between my trembling fingers, jokingly pretending to propose on our very first date. If you're watching this ripple of love unfold, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you believe in hope, compassion, and second chances. I hadn't meant the joke to matter. Back then, I was nothing more than a man trying to bury the pieces of his past beneath a smile. My name is Rowan, 32 years old, a carpenter whose days were spent shaping wood into things that lasted longer than the people who once filled my life. Losing my mother young had carved something hollow inside me, and losing my younger brother by the time I turned 29 had widened that hollow into a quiet chamber where guilt lived permanently. I had mastered the art of pretending to be fine, pretending that the long hours in my workshop were simply passion, not avoidance. When I met Mara, I didn't expect anything except a brief flicker of interest, the kind that burns out quickly once someone sees the cracks beneath the surface. But Mara didn't look away from cracks. She traced them with gentleness. We met on a bright morning in early spring, when the world still smelled of rain but the sky promised better days. I arrived early to the garden cafe where she suggested we meet, and I remember rehearsing pointless jokes to keep the conversation light. When she walked toward me, her long brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail and her eyes carrying a subtle glimmer of curiosity, I felt something strange, something like a shift in gravity. She wore a simple white tank top and black skirt, nothing extravagant, yet somehow she looked like a scene from a film I'd watched 100 times but never remembered until that moment. The date was going well enough that I forgot to pretend for a while. She laughed easily, a sound like wind chimes in warm air. She asked thoughtful questions. She listened without rushing. And when she caught me staring a little too long at her while she rambled excitedly about her dream of opening a community art center, I panicked. I reached into my pocket, found an old brass ring I used as a key holder, and lifted it between us with the clumsy grin of a man trying too hard to hide the way his heart had begun beating differently. I asked in a teasing, melodramatic voice if she would marry me on our first date. I had expected her to roll her eyes, maybe laugh and throw a napkin at me. But instead, she touched the ring lightly, her cheeks warming, and said she hoped I kept that promise someday. Her voice was soft, but it carried something that settled deep inside me, an invitation not to run this time. Her story unfolded slowly as we spent more days together beneath sunlit skies. Mara grew up with an artist mother who drifted between inspiration and the shadows of mild depression. She learned early how to anchor people who drifted, how to keep warmth alive even when seasons turned harsh. Mara believed in creating beauty from brokenness. Perhaps that was why she saw something worth staying for in me. Her own fear, though, was abandonment. She had been left before, not by lovers but by circumstances, a father who vanished before she could remember him, friends who moved on while she remained stuck caring for her grieving mother. Yet she still chose hope. It impressed me more than I ever admitted aloud. Life, however, does not grant happiness freely. It tests, it pushes, it steals. 6 months into our growing love, Mara started experiencing sudden weakness in her arms and dizzy spells that left her breathless. She shrugged it off as exhaustion from overworking her art projects, but I saw the worry flickering behind her bright expressions. When she finally agreed to a medical checkup, the diagnosis came like a blade dropped into the quiet of our world, an autoimmune condition that attacked her nervous system unpredictably, causing dangerous fluctuations in her mobility and stamina. The doctors explained treatment paths carefully, but all I could see was fear rising behind Mara's brave smile. Her illness didn't just test her body, it tested everything fragile inside both of us. I tried to stay strong, but nights alone in my workshop found me crumbling. I was terrified of losing someone again, terrified of failing to protect her, terrified of the guilt I knew would consume me if I couldn't keep her safe. Mara sensed my fears even when I hid them. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the curtains of my workshop, she leaned her head against my shoulder and whispered that love was not measured by victories over pain but by choosing to stay through it. I stayed. Through the trembling episodes. Through the hospital visits. Through the nights she cried because her body betrayed her. Through the days I wanted to scream because I couldn't fix anything with my hands. Through the slow unraveling of her confidence. Through the moments she told me I deserved someone healthy, someone simple, someone who wouldn't make me watch life slip away. But I had already chosen. The moment she touched that brass ring on our first date, I had chosen. The day I planned to propose, for real this time, was one of the last warm afternoons of late summer. I brought her back to the same garden cafe. I rebuilt the small brass ring box myself, crafting a tiny wooden inlay in its lid. I wanted the moment to feel full circle, like fate acknowledging our promise. She was smiling that morning, a real smile, the kind that softened all her edges. For a while, her illness felt distant, almost forgotten. But life has a way of breaking things at their most beautiful peak. Before I could kneel, before she could see the ring inside the little box, her steps faltered. Her hand pressed to her chest. Her body swayed. I caught her just before she hit the ground, her eyes flickering with confusion and fear. The cafe blurred into chaos. People rushed. Someone called an ambulance. I felt her slipping, drifting, fading like a candle losing oxygen. That was how I ended up in the hospital corridor, gripping the box with white knuckles, blaming myself for waiting too long. Hours passed like lifetimes until finally, the doctor stepped out and told me she was stable but unconscious. Her condition had triggered a severe collapse, one that could have gone differently if help had come minutes later. I entered her room quietly. She looked small beneath the layers of machines and wires, but she also looked peaceful, as though caught in a moment suspended outside of pain. I sat beside her, holding her hand gently, speaking promises into the silence. I told her I wasn't leaving. I told her that hope wasn't just something she had given me, it was something we made together. I told her the promise I once made as a joke had become the truest intention of my life. When Mara finally opened her eyes the next morning, sunlight was spilling across the sheets, and her breathing was steady. She looked at me weakly, but her eyes still carried that familiar warmth. The first thing she whispered was an apology for scaring me. The second was a question, whether I was still here, still choosing her despite everything. Of course I was. Before the ending arrives, I ask viewers to comment below and share what moment touched them most. I placed the wooden ring box in her trembling hands, telling her this was the promise she once said she hoped I'd keep. Tears slipped down her cheeks, soft and shining. She didn't need to say yes, the way she held me, clinging with fragile strength, spoke louder than anything words could form. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to like, comment, share, and subscribe to support more stories like this. And so our journey continued, not with perfection but with courage, the kind woven from fear and love and the stubborn refusal to let go. Together, we learned that life doesn't wait for the perfect time to test you, it tests you so you can discover the depth of your own devotion. And in that sunlit hospital room, surrounded by quiet hope, I understood something I had spent a lifetime running from: broken things can still be beautiful, and promises born from laughter can become the anchors that save us when the world threatens to break. In the end, love didn't heal everything, but it made everything worth surviving.